Hi, welcome to episode 19 of the American Tributaries podcast, where to break out the bubbles we've all been living in these last few years, we are using modern technology to explore the various currents of people in our great country, kind of like a 21st century Lewis and Clark journey. I'm your host, Michael Whidden, and thank you for joining me on this exploration of America. If you enjoy listening, please subscribe on whatever platform you're using, give us a like in this particular episode, and check us out on Instagram at American Tributaries. Today, I'm really thrilled to be joined by somebody who I've known for a while, but only met last fall. John Jastremski was a longtime announcer on WFAN Sports Radio, where he had his own show, JJ After Dark. He did that for about a decade and then left in April of 2021 to start his own podcast, New York, New York, on the Pop Culture and Sports Network, podcast network and website, The Ringer. John and I met each other in our Brooklyn neighborhood. I think we kind of crossed paths on the sidewalk. And, when you listen to somebody's voice for, so many hours and you finally hear it unexpectedly in real life, it kind of really catches your attention. So, John, thanks so much for, making that initial connection back last October. And thanks so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
Mike, I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. And I love, by the way, that I am episode 19 of your new podcast, because 19 was my old baseball uniform number and is one of my lucky numbers that I will always play on a roulette wheel. So coincidence or not, good scheduling there on number 19, my friend.
That is called good research. No.
I was going to say, do you like Google any of see, the problem is I'm like so old now, like you can't even find like high school uniform pictures of me in like a Patriots baseball uniform with like a number 19 on. Like now I feel for like these kids, you would see it on like their Instagrams, or you'd probably be able to Google search it and find it. For me, no, too old school, dude.
Well, I mean, I guess there is a lot out there. I usually try not to do too much specific research because I kind of feel like I like the tone of this to be a little bit more kind of conversational, like, just us grabbing a cup of coffee or a drink at, Bar Bruno around the corner and just kind of like, chatting. That's how I usually kind of present it. But so I know I paid short shrift to like what you're up to. I know you're up to more than like the podcast. What else are you doing during your, now in your post WFAN life?
Yeah, it's crazy you say that, Mike. I was talking about this with somebody yesterday. I don't think I've ever been more busy. Now, maybe it's stuff going on work-wise combined with everything that's going on, personal life, trying to plan a wedding or whatnot. But I am basically doing 5 days a week over at SNY, which is the regional sports network here in New York, and obviously the home of the New York Mets for anybody who is not familiar with SNY. And then we're churning out so much good stuff with New York, New York, and the Ringer Gambling Show. And we're just coming off a period where we were going full tilt from the NBA playoffs to the NCAA tournament to football season. So it feels like, all right, you can make your own schedule, which is great. You're doing that around the games. But when stuff is really, really busy, you look up and you're like, whoa, I'm working like a madman, which is great. I love what I do. I don't take it for granted in any way. But, a lot of people thought, oh, maybe JJ won't be working as much hours-wise now that he's leaving the grind of doing like 4 or 5 hours of daily radio. And the reality to that is that, Mike, I've never been working more.
Really? So, I mean,
and I say that in a good way, though, because I'm like busy with so many great opportunities that I have going.
Yeah. Well, like, so from a viewer perspective, we might see you on for, I listened to your podcast like yesterday, and I know it's like an hour and 10 minutes or, whatever it is. And then you're on TV for a bit of time. How much work is going on behind the scenes? And I know, like, we've talked before, and you said you don't necessarily prepare specifically for going on the podcast. You're kind of talking off the top of your head just because you're so immersed in the sports world. But like, how much is happening behind the scenes to fill up your day versus what people might see out in public?
Look, I think for somebody like me that has the job that I do, the biggest key is just being well-versed in what you're talking about and having you got to have a good background. You got to understand where you work. You got to understand the dynamics of the teams and the city that you live in. But at the same time, for me, like my biggest piece of like prep work, it's not necessarily taking down 1,000 notes and, transcribing a baseball game like, it's a court hearing. Like I for one don't operate that way. Others might, but I don't. For me, I'm lucky I have a pretty good visual memory. You watch a lot of games, you follow who you need to follow on Twitter, you read enough about what's going on, and you're able to just go and create conversation. That's what I've always tried to do. So like for me, doing a podcast is very free flowing. It's a lot of thoughts that come to my mind and I just go like that. And I know not everybody has that within them, but that's kind of what makes me tick more than anything.
Yeah. Well, I guess to me, a little bit, that's the way I've looked at the podcast, is just in terms of like, it is just like that free flowing conversation. And I feel like I go out with the mindset of curiosity and just hope that goes, it's interesting enough. But the one time I find for myself, it's a little challenging is that it's not, there's no particular expertise. Like I'm talking to you today, and the other day I was talking to a woman who's the waitress at a Cracker Barrel that we went to in South Carolina. So I'm shifting between lots of different gears, but I think that's what I want to encourage people to do, is kind of understand all the different lives and worlds that are out there. And
well, I think it's great. And listen, it goes to show you that you have a lot of people, not only here in New York, but across the country, that are living very, very different lifestyles. That, it's depending on what their line of work may be, or their family situation, or their upbringing. So like, everybody's coming from a different place. And, Mike, honestly, like I think about when I was younger, probably around like that 17, 18 range. And then you get to like where you're 21, 22, and you're like, am I going to be able to have a career talking about sports? Like, is it realistic? Is there like a path for it? And, like in the business that I'm in, you got to get very, very lucky. Like you really do. Like getting an opportunity, getting somebody to give you a chance. That's in many ways the hardest thing about breaking through in the business. But at the same time, you got to make your own luck too. I do believe that. Like, I think you have to get lucky. And I certainly did. I got very, very lucky to get my start right after I went to Syracuse. Very, very lucky. But if I wasn't able to do what I do, I still wouldn't be talking. Let's put it this way. I wouldn't be talking to you today. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I saw in like your LinkedIn profile, I don't
know if I've updated that. So
you're still at WFAN.
Oh yeah. So maybe I gotta work on that. People have told me, you should get on. I don't really, and I am on social media pretty often, but I've not been on LinkedIn. Maybe that's what I'll do today. Maybe I'll update the LinkedIn profile for anybody who's keeping score at home.
Well, but the interesting thing is looking at your career is that early on, like I saw that you had a gig where you were like writing about like New Jersey high school sports.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, that's really, I don't want to say that's where I got my start, because Syracuse is where I kind of honed my craft and finding a voice and, having a command and a presence and being able to do sports talk in any platform. But the reality is, Mike, and I tell this to a lot of young broadcasters, and I know we don't have a lot of young broadcasters listen, but that's okay. It's to me a life lesson more than anything. I got at Syracuse, really good broadcasting school. I'm 21, 22. I'm like, all right, I'm good at what I do. I'm going to find a job, no problem. Well, 6 months go by. I'm living at home. I got student debt staring me in the face. I'm making no money. And I had to take a job at like the NBA store over the holiday season, basically folding shirts and making announcements on loudspeaker. And like, it's the holiday season. I'm taking the ferry and the subway into the city. And I'm like, this is what my life is. And I'm 22, so I had no perspective. I didn't get it. And I understand people have it a lot worse than me. So like, everybody's, dilemma and crisis in life is going to be different. I get that. But at the same time, I'm like, I didn't go to Syracuse to do this. What is going on with my life? Got the gig maybe about a month or two later, making no money. I mean, when I mean making no money, I'm making no money covering high school sports. And I got to be honest, Mike, for like 2 or 3 months after leaving like the NBA store and just being out at a field and talking to like 15 and 16-year-old kids and then going to write the story and then maybe hitting a bar at the Jersey Shore afterwards, it was kind of fun. I mean, it wasn't sustainable. It wasn't like something I wanted to do long term, but it kind of set my path mentally for, well, whatever that next challenge may be. And, sometimes like I said, you gotta really have some good luck and some good fortune, and, a lot of stuff kind of aligned for you to go the way that you go. I ended up winning a contest, got my big break, and the rest, as they say in the business, is history.
Yeah. Well, I think I have mixed feelings sometimes about sports, because in the one hand, it's such a fantasy world, right? And it's so simplistic in some respects. But I think there are so many there's so many life themes that I think are useful there. And like one of the things with sports is nobody's going to ever hand you anything, right? When you look, and nothing is preordained. Like I think and what I find interesting listening to like sports radio is like the debates and the anger almost that can happen when people are debating something like, is Tom Brady a great quarterback, right? Or like LeBron versus like Michael Jordan. And I think that's one thing I find interesting. But like in looking at like Tom Brady, like he was never preordained to like be Tom Brady. Like he had to kind of seize every little opportunity that was handed to him. He had to believe in that vision, just like you had to believe that you were meant to be more than in that NBA store. And I think like in this society, nobody really hands you anything, so you really have to have almost a delusional belief in yourself to kind of manifest the dream that you have for yourself.
I do think there's something to be said for that. And I'm never going to compare myself to Tom Brady, Mike, in any form of life. I mean, listen, God bless. I appreciate it. That's very, very kind. But, I guess the point with Brady is, he was a 6th-round pick, for those of you who don't know. He didn't have a whole lot of fanfare coming in the NFL. He needed a $100 million quarterback to get knocked out of a game by Mo Lewis of the New York Jets, took an opportunity, made the most of an opportunity, and basically ran with it and turned himself into the greatest quarterback of all time. So, obviously not everybody is going to have that perfect bounce of the ball go every which way. Like so my career, when I was a kid, probably like 16, 17, if you would have told me I'd end up at WFA, I was like, this is dream stuff. I like the dream stuff. But then you realize, hey, there's a grind to it, So I started, I'm doing one show a week, 2 hours. That's nothing. I mean, that's nothing. It was a 1-year contract. So I had to parlay that into, all right, maybe going from 1 day a week to 2 days a week. And listen, Mike, full disclosure, I had the luxury, not everybody has this, of being in my mid-20s. It was basically, I was able to be all in. I didn't have to support anyone. I was able to kind of put all of my chips into the middle of the table, where somebody who's, father of 3 or, is in a situation where they're trying to help out, let's say their mom or their dad at home, maybe could not have been able to go and put their chips in the middle of the table the way I did, but thankfully I was able to kind of just grind it out. And, you just kept grinding and working and getting more and more opportunities. And thankfully it's led to bigger and better things.
Yeah. You've been doing this for a while now, but is there people that you get to like talk to or meet where you're like, it's still kind of like the little boy and you still react? I mean, it could be somebody from like when you were a kid, or, like superstars now, like, or are you past being starstruck by anybody at this point?
When I think about guys now, not really. Like, I mean, listen, if you told me I ran into Brady, I'd be a little starstruck, that might do it. I'm not even a Patriot or a Bucks fan, but it's just like, he's the greatest quarterback of all time. It's more the guys from my childhood, to be honest with you, Mike, more than anything else. Like, I had Paul O'Neill on the podcast a few weeks ago, and I met Paul O'Neill when I was doing shows at Citi Field a few years ago for the Subway Series. That kind of geeked me out. When I met the guy behind me, Dan Marino, and my hair was way more of a mess than it is today. I was coming off the subway. It was Super Bowl week in New York. It was like 10 degrees, and I was dopey enough to have a winter hat on. I took it off, and the only picture I have now with Dan Marino, I can't even put in my office with me and him because my hair just is in. It's a total. I look like Sideshow Bob from The Simpsons. It's a total disaster. But those are the guys that kind of like, that will still get to me, where it's like, yeah, they meant a lot to me in my childhood. They kind of stayed with me. Um, the athlete today, like, I love Aaron Judge. He's a phenomenal baseball player. Would I be really starstruck though if I saw him? Not really.
We met David Wright in 2006 under the stands at Shea after a playoff game, and I remember like it was the first time where I like checked myself because I was like, I'm excited to meet him, but it also felt a little bit kind of like, I don't know if it's because I'm a lot older than him, but I think maybe there's more perspective also. Like when you're a little kid, those baseball players are heroic
They're
when they're
everything.
right.
They're everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, for me, like, it was like Paul O'Neill and Derek Jeter and any of those. Yeah. Like, you're starstruck as a kid. And, I think being in the business too, I don't want to say you get jaded by that like special feeling, but like you realize, hey, these are guys. Like, and I think you notice it more too when I go to like these charity events. Like, I'll play in like a charity golf outing, and you'll see guys that you grew up where you were like, wow, I watched every minute, I watched every moment of your career, and then you're like, yeah, they're just a normal dude, and it's cool to see in some ways, but it also, I think, kind of gives you more of a perspective of kind of where they're coming from a little bit.
Yeah. What do you think? Like, I think now more than ever, because like sports are just so out there. And I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but my perception of one of the values of sports is that because it's one of the few live events that people want to watch, right? Like everything else can be kind of streamed or watch when you want, but the sporting event is something where you get eyeballs right now. So it's more, you have more, I guess the timing is one of the few, it's like viewing, it's like, what are they, I don't know the term of it, but like it's one of the few events that people want to actually watch live, right? So at particular moments of the day and week. So it's more popular than ever. And kind of, you know what, I've already gone off of the tangent, but I guess like what do you think people don't understand? Like what is the life of an athlete beyond what you see? You see the 3 hours of heroics on TV, and there's a lot of practice, but what is the downside or the other side of, like, I guess the professional athlete's life that you think people don't get to appreciate, that maybe would either tamp down dreams or at least kind of maybe make people appreciate even more how hard it is to be a professional athlete?
Well, I think it's the idea that these folks are people, and we put them up on such a pedestal. Kids idolize them. We talk about them on a daily basis. They make mistakes. They're human beings. And I'm as guilty of this as anyone, Mike. I mean, thankfully, I have a platform where, we talk about a guy not being able to get a hit, or a guy running his mouth or something along those lines. And, we don't try to make it personal, but there are definitely guys that we like, and there are definitely guys that we don't. And, I don't think sometimes you put into perspective the challenge of, hey, you got 50,000 people booing you to the high heavens because you can't get a hit, or they're, watching every move that you make in an interview or every word that you say. It's not easy, man. It's not easy. They're well paid. They live a lavish lifestyle. I think a lot of people would say, yeah, I'd sign up for that life in an instant. But I also think there is an element of play that you got to really try to understand. And sometimes I do. And sometimes, quite frankly, I'm as guilty as anybody else. I don't, and realize kind of the perspective that some of these guys are coming from.
Yeah. I mean, to nothing else, I think just the idea of, like, imagine signing a contract where you're getting paid, it could be $5 million, it could be $40 million.
Hey, let's be honest, Mike, life-changing money for a lot of these guys.
Yeah. But then imagine the pressure. We talk about the pressure, but I feel it's hard enough when you have a stable salary and you feel like you didn't perform for the day. But imagine having, getting made tens of millions and you're not living up to that contract, and what that must feel like.
And then you have situations where you have athletes coming from underprivileged backgrounds, where they are in a position where they are the life raft for the rest of the family. The idea that, hey, we're going to make it big, and you're going to be able to take care of us, and you're going to be able to do this and that. And let's be real. Some of that stuff for these players, even if they do make it to the top of the food chain, it stays with them. The idea that, hey, we got to take care of this guy in the neighborhood, or we got to take care of this guy, or this family member. That's not easy. That's not easy, because you got a lot of different people in your ear And obviously, some guys are better equipped to handle that sort of stuff than others. We've seen that.
Yeah. We were watching the draft, the NBA draft last week, and I was telling like my wife as we were watching. I think the Knicks had their pick, and like for that guy who got chosen, it's for him. It's like it's the highlight of his moment. Like, this is his first really moment of fame, and then like ESPN like quickly goes to like Spike Lee with his like head in his hands, and I'm like, Christy, like, think about how hard it must be for that guy to like be so excited to be celebrating this moment with his family, and then you go to like the number one fan for that team, and he looks like so horribly disappointed.
Well, and
like,
you know what, Mike? It happens all the time. It happens all the time. Thankfully for the French player, it didn't last long because he got traded about 2 minutes later. So that's number one. So you didn't have to worry too much about Spike Lee. Number two, I remember Donovan McNabb, and I know this, and I remember this vividly because he ended up. I always liked Donovan McNabb. Even I'm a Dolphin fan. But I liked him at Syracuse. I wasn't even a thought at Syracuse at that point. I was probably like 11 or 12 years old. He got drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles. And Mike, they booed him like it was Santa Claus getting booed in Philadelphia. It was not a pretty sight. And they turned out really loving him. He had a terrific career there. So, with that sort of stuff, hey, you got to just go and let your play do the talking at that point.
Yeah, it seems in some respects, like with like social media, like everybody has become their own little like professional athlete, and like you kind of in some respects have to tune out the all that negativity that's out there.
Mike, if I played and I don't, there is no way I'd be on that stuff, reading what people are saying, because I don't think I'd be able to like I get stuff plenty of times, and some stuff bothers me more than others. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I used to take it far more personally when I first started my career, maybe than I do right now. But listen, there's still some stuff that I get very, very sensitive about. Like that bothers me. You know what I mean? So you try to like kind of keep it inside of you, and just deal with it and do the best you can with it. But I can't imagine it's got to be 1,000 times worse for some of these dudes. Totally.
Yeah. So, you're on all different forms of media. Do you find one, I guess, either not necessarily the most appealing, but maybe the most effective in terms of kind of like talking about things, or do you find they all have their drawbacks?
Social media, you mean?
Yeah, and not just social media, but like podcasting versus TV versus radio versus Twitter. They're all different.
Listen, when we're talking about me and what I do, I like having the space on my podcast to really get into the nitty gritty. I feel like I can connect with the audience. I can really just go off. And my biggest fear, to be honest with you, about leaving radio to go to podcast is that connection I would have with the caller. Now with our Spotify Live app, I do it once a week. I talk to plenty of my callers. We still have voicemails on the podcast, so that element's taken care of. Okay. TV, it's great getting your face out there, but you don't have a ton of time because I'm on a half-hour Geico Sports Night show where highlights are part of it. And we have it breaking down in all sorts of segments and whatnot. So I may be on 2 segments for about 4 or 5 minutes of TV. So it's a little bit more structured. It's great. I love it. I'm really glad that I do it, but I'm not going to be able to get every little nook and cranny out that I want to talk about. That's fine. Social media, for me, the best tool to grow my show, it's not even close. It's Twitter. It's just, I feel like it's where sports fans are from a standpoint of they're looking for news. They're following certain, reporters and broadcasters and players. So they get thoughts. I'm on Instagram. I enjoy it. I don't think it's the best tool for me promoting my show, but I do it nonetheless. I'm done with Facebook. I can't do Facebook anymore. I may still have a page, but I do not spend much time on there. Let's put it that way. And I used to, when I first started, Mike, like in 2011, I used to put a show post up basically every time for my Facebook status. Now, never in a million years. Never. It's just turning it too much of like a political cesspool, to be honest with you. Yeah. I mean, Twitter is too. But I feel like it's different for me because of who you follow and, it's you're still getting information and whatnot. Facebook, I mean, forget about it. It can be embarrassing, in my opinion, embarrassing. But
Yeah, I've found like when I post things on Facebook, I've been more writing, like the more extensive thoughts. They don't really get paid attention to at all. It's a lot easier to just kind of put like a little one sentence quip or like rage thing or something, and that gets you more engagement on Facebook. But yeah, I
for
don't
better
think.
or
Yeah,
worse, yes, for better or worse.
yeah. So I mean, I think I enjoy still being on. I try to look at the good and bad. Like, I mean, it's easy to kind of get upset or despondent about what technology is doing to us, but like it allows us to have this podcast here, and I've enjoyed, like, I think, reconnecting with some people on Facebook, and I think part of really coping with all these different forms of connections is learning maybe when to just not say something, and also learning
That's a
how
good
much you have
point.
to kind of like just not listen.
That's a good point. And unfortunately, there are just not enough people in our society who will take that approach.
Yeah,
Because
there were, and
sometimes it's okay to sit a play out.
there was somebody who said it's an actor who you wouldn't expect it to say, but I guess they said that when they think about what they want to say, it's like, does this need to be said? Does it need to be said now? Does it need to be said by me? And I think those are the three things that I try to kind of use to filter a little bit of like what I think. I mean, there are things that I'd like to maybe talk about, but it's also just not the time and place. You have private thoughts. You're not an expert. You're still working things out. It doesn't have to be out there in the public forum. And I think there's lots of things that are.
And that's a good point. And I think it's a good lesson for not only a broadcaster, but I think it's a good lesson for anybody out there. Like, listen, sometimes it's very easy to go to a keyboard and put things into a message because you're not saying it to somebody face to face. And I always try to like put myself in the shoes of, hey, would I feel okay saying this to somebody? Yeah. Or am I going to sound like a Twitter tough guy or a keyboard warrior? Like there's way too many of those out there, Mike.
And I think, but you have, and which because I've been trying to break out of my bubble, obviously with this podcast and in other forms. So I've been trying to make friends with people outside of the cultural, political bubble that we have here in the city. And what I've found is that I'm also becoming more mindful of people that are out there. And like for you, I'm sure that's your position as well. It's like you have lots of different fans out there, lots of different people who are looking to you. And
Mike, I'm well aware of it. And listen, that's why anytime there is an issue that is polarizing outside of, it's very easy for me to get into a sports debate because it might get angry, it might get contentious, but it is a sports debate. When you move off of that, no matter what the topic may be, and especially now in this hypersensitive, polarized climate that we live in this country, it puts me in a very awkward position. It really does, where it's like, well, if I put something out there, am I going to lose listeners? Am I going to lose viewers? Am I going to say, and listen, some stuff, it's impossible, right? It's impossible, but like, it's not ideal, like I try to, it's not the idea of saying, hey, like you can have beliefs and you can have backbone, like you can, but like you are mindful that, you got a lot of different people from a lot of different philosophies listening to you. And if you say something about sports, you're not going to offend them maybe necessarily. You get into another element, you might.
But I think it's also that it's like you're dropping into somebody's living room and you're dropping into somebody's life in your job. And I think part of it is sometimes it sounds like you're not. I don't think it's necessarily even like self-censorship. It's more, I think some of it is also out of respect for other people's lives, that you might have your own opinion that could be strong one way or the other, but it's also not really your point. It's not your position to jump in and say,
exactly,
like, you should think this way. That's not your position. I try to think of it as not self-censorship at all. It's just more about being mindful of the different lives that are out there.
Yeah, and I try to be. And listen, I'm not perfect. I don't think anybody is. And there's some situations where it's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have gone down this road, or maybe I shouldn't have said this. But day to day, bro. That's all you can do. It's on to the next show. It's on the next day.
Yeah. And with sports, like nothing is resolvable, and you can always find an argument about something.
Yes. Right? And listen, I think the biggest thing for me is if you've listened to me or you watch me, what you hear, what you see is what you get. I think I'm pretty honest. I'm pretty blunt. I'm pretty sincere, and there's no BS, man. That's it. I'm gonna be who I'm gonna be. That's just
Yeah, for
the
sure.
way it is.
Yeah. So I know you got to get going. I'd like to finish up, and I apologize for not giving a heads up on this, but I think we've kind of talked about this sometimes. But what gives you hope at the end of the day? Like what gives you kind of energized? What keeps you kind of with a positive outlook as you look out there
It's
into
funny
the
you
world?
mention that. I had this conversation with my fiance yesterday. It's just that Mike, and maybe this is naive, and maybe this is just not the rational way to look at it. I like to see the good in people, and I think, unfortunately, as a society, a lot of folks want to see the ugly side of every individual. And people aren't perfect. People say things they shouldn't say. They make mistakes. They do things that are stupid. But I want to believe that people have good hearts, and that that their hearts are in the right place, and that they're people loving what they do and loving being a part of a fabric of a community and whatnot. Like whether it's a sports community, whether it's our community in Brooklyn, whether it's guys you see on the golf course or whatnot. Like I do want to believe, and maybe it's naive, but there's a good in people. And listen, I think I see it when I do my shows, the idea of bringing people together and just basically, I try to envision my show as hey, we're at the bar, we're all gathered around the bar, just having a couple of pops and letting rip, I'm just basically facilitating as the bartender. We got a bunch of guys and gals in the mix. That's for me always something that I try to keep looking at, where I'm all right, there's a lot of good people in the world. Despite everything that might be going on, despite things that really might upset you, there's a lot of good out there.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, totally agree.
I hope that wasn't too cliche for you, but I do believe it.
No, it's a choice. I think at the end of the day, you can choose to see anything and either come away from it with a negative feeling or positive. And none of us are perfect, and we all have bad days. And sometimes you can look at a beautiful sunset, and it gives you hope. And then sometimes you look at it, it can remind you of there's nothing else beautiful in my life except for this sunset. So I'm even more depressed. So
yeah, I try to listen. That's my persona, Mike. I try to keep it as positive as I can, and sometimes it's to a fault. Maybe sometimes it's a little misguided, but that's just how I roll.
Yeah. All right, sir. Well, thanks so much for joining me on this. It's been great, and especially given the tight schedule you've got.
Well, I appreciate it. I hope I didn't disappoint, and I'll see you in the neighborhood, man. Don't be a stranger.
Yeah, same here. All right, take care, JJ. We'll see you around.
You got it.